Hey everybody, welcome back to another Carolina basketball podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. This is THI publisher Andrew Jones, and joining me is the one and only, the great David Sisk, longtime college, AAU, and high school basketball coach. David has coached plenty of guys that have gone to the NBA, a boatload that have played major college basketball. He's a tactician. He's an analyst. He can scope out talent. And tonight we are going to discuss the Tar Heels. 32 games in, regular season is completely over with now. The Tar Heels played well in stretches against Duke Saturday night, ended up losing the game by 13 points, had a 35-13 run inside that game, but Duke closed 33-13. We will talk about that. We'll talk about the last few weeks of Carolina, what David buys into from what he's seen from the team. And David also does this for our Kentucky site in the Rivals.com network. So he's been watching a lot of SEC basketball, has for years, has this year. And I think that perspective will help us when we talk about North Carolina's viability as an NCAA tournament team and how you weigh Carolina's schedule and why its quad one record is going to be so important when the people on the selection committee sit in that room and talk about however many wins the Tar Heels have. Well, how many really important ones do they have compared to teams from a lot of other conferences? But David, before we get into this, I want to do a quick reminder to everybody. We are really on track to get 12,000 followers on our Facebook page, which we'll do pretty soon. Once we do, some of our new followers will randomly choose a few of you to get a one-year subscription to Tar Heel Illustrated for free. We're still efforting to hit 20,000 right here on YouTube. So if you have not subscribed, please do so now. It doesn't cost you anything. You will then enter into a pool of candidates to randomly be selected to win a free subscription to Tar Heel Illustrated, but I keep getting confused sometimes. The YouTube, we're giving away 2 year. Two people are going to get 2 years of THI for free. Then, of course, Twitter, we're lagging behind a little bit over there. We're trying to get to 40,000 by the end of spring football. So go on over there and follow us as well, and you can enter into a pool of candidates to win free THI. Bottom line is we want to give away a lot of free THI. We got to hit these goals in order to do so. And just by participating and helping push us along, you have a chance to win THI for free yourself. And you'll get a lot of David's stuff that you're never going to get on a podcast. And honestly, the only content item that David produces for us that's free are these videos. Everything else is behind a paywall because it should be. If you've never listened to Dave before, you'll find out now. If you have, you understand why, because David Sisk is the man. You're him. That's what the young people say today. He's him. You're him. Have I built you up enough?
I'll never live up to that.
You'll never live up to that, I know. People don't understand that. I'm just trying to get David to do more work for me. That's all.
That's it. There's always a reason. When they're not.
It's March. It's March. We never have enough. So, David, Carolina loses to Duke, finishes the regular season 20-12, 13-7 in the ACC. I don't think that's important. I think the important record is 1-10, 1-11. And quad one games. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, what is your take on the way the Tar Heels played Saturday night against Duke? What did you take away that is a positive? And what did you take away that continues to be a concern that you've had for the last 4 months about this team?
Well, first of all, I thought they played extremely hard. And it was a perfect storm for North Carolina. You know, the first half, they come back, they trimmed the lead. I think it was 1 at the half. It's 43-42. And then, they take an early second half lead. They go up by 5. The crowd's rocking. The team's energized. And then Duke just kind of did what Duke does. And it's just a hard team to have a must-win against. I've said all year, I think Auburn's the best team in the country. I said it. In November when they beat Houston, I said, this is the best team I've seen. I've not seen anything really to change it, but Duke's making a hard push. I think to me there's 2 teams that stand out, and that's Auburn and Duke. I've heard some people say just go ahead and hopefully keep them on opposite sides of the bracket and let them play for a national championship. But I'm not here to praise Duke. I'm just here to say if you're North Carolina and you put yourself in a situation – or you've got a must win at the end of the year and you're playing Duke, man, you have really painted yourself into a corner. But I thought the effort was really, really good. I felt like The pressure, the defensive pressure that they played with, I thought it rattled Duke a little bit. I felt like when Duke didn't score, North Carolina could get the ball out off the rim and really run. And although the transition points didn't show it, it's really weird to me kind of how like they do fast break points because with official stats. Because if you look up and you said, man, North Carolina's just pushing this thing down Duke's throat with quick shots and sprinting down the floor and getting shots at the rim, you look up and they gave them like 4 fast break points in the first half. Yeah. That's not indicative at all of the way they played. So it basically came down to me to this. A lot of ball pressure, and Duke was kind of hit or miss. The pressure either forced them into a turnover or a tough shot, but when they could get to that middle ball screen and get to the rim, to me, this was the game where North Carolina's lack of size. And, it's been something we've harped on. Everybody's harped on all year long, not just us. But they've been able to overcome that against some teams that they played lately. It showed against Duke. Duke owned the boards, but Duke, if they got to the rim, North Carolina just didn't have any rim protection. Duke finished everything at the rim. So when Duke scores, then North Carolina can't run. And that's really what you got to in the second half. When it got down into half court, Duke had that advantage. They got it slowed down, and North Carolina just couldn't get stops. And if you look, Duke shot 56% from the game, 47% from three. If you look at points in the paint, Duke 40-28. Rebounding, Duke was plus 13. Second chance points, not a lot for Duke, but I just thought the size was too much. And those kind of teams, we know the kind of teams that give North Carolina problems. You called it. You said Clemson would be too big for them. Duke was too big. You look at Auburn and Alabama, big teams. Florida, big team. And like I said, I felt like they played hard. I felt R.J. Davis, they needed him to have a hot hand. He had 15 in the first half, and he was getting in that RJ mode where he was just unconscious, but he only had 5 in the second half, and that was a big issue because Lubin had 11. That's the only other player scoring double figures. They had a bunch of guys. 7s were wild last night. They had a bunch of guys with 7 points. But that's some of the things that I noticed pro and con.
And I had tweeted a couple of things, and it got some really interesting responses. Some people a little bit of disagreement, which I totally welcome and embrace because I like the discourse. It was about Carolina's offense, about how they were really not even attempting to run their stuff. But sometimes when you're there and you're in person and you're covering the game, you want to go back and watch. And Duke's a very difficult team to run your stuff with because they switch everything and they switch with size. And I don't know how many times either Mullawash was on RJ, and then later on when Malik Brown was on him a lot, really shut him down. Duke just doesn't let you run your stuff. So the criticism of Carolina not running its offense, I could temper that some because Duke just doesn't let you get into what you're doing, which is why when Carolina had that 35-13 run, they didn't have to run a lot of half-court stuff. Yeah, they were getting quick things. So Duke's ability to switch in its length and play 1 through 5 defensively wasn't as much of an asset as it was when the game slowed a little bit and Carolina had to run more half-court stuff.
Well, one thing I noticed was in the first half, early in the game, Duke – they were running the ball screen. Duke was switching automatically. So they were trying to go with the mismatch. And you saw RJ punish it. And when North Carolina made the run on Duke, that's what you saw them running. But you saw also RJ getting hot and them having a hard time defending him with a big. Early in the game, Elliot Cadeau's on the ball. And the first 4 to 5 minutes, I mean, it was just – the ball was totally in his hands, and it was out of RJ's hands. So he's either penetrating, he's trying to get up a shot, and a lot of times what he does, you know how he is, he's not going to pull out. He's just going to go full bore to the rim as hard as he can go, and there's too much size in there and he gets cut off. That's the difference. That RJ doesn't have to do that. RJ can shoot the 3 off the dribble. He can pull up on the mid-range. It's just whatever the mismatch allows him to get. where Cadeau's constantly trying to get to the rim, and you get too deep, and he's too small, and it's not there. Yep. Then when they made the substitution, you saw that settle down offensively a little bit where they started to score more, but Duke still stretched the lead even with that change because they couldn't get stops. But then once the defense, and I really felt like they picked up the pressure. And I thought that was a big part. They pick up the pressure defensively out on the floor. Duke got a little rattled. John Shire, when he was interviewed at halftime, he said, he's going to ask the guys, in a very nonchalant manner, laid-back manner, why are you guys getting excited? And he didn't want to have any excitement in his voice. Why are you getting panicky and excited and nervous offensively? Take care of that. But, when North Carolina could pressure, like you said, they could get out and run and do those things. But I think when you're going 105 or not necessarily 105, I shouldn't say that. When you're getting a ball screen, you're going one-on-one to one against the five is what I meant to say. They're still Duke's so big and lengthy still. I mean, you got Cooper Flagg out there at 6'10", and that's the thing about them. Their threes and their fours and all that. They just got all this size, just like Alabama had, just like Auburn had, just like Florida had. So, yeah, you might get by the five guy, but they just got so much length hanging on there at the rim. It's just it's tough. Even if you get by your guy, it's just hard finishes at the rim.
Yeah, I like the pressure. The pressure doesn't have to get steals. They do get some. They've had some success getting steals in the backcourt, but I thought what they did that worked to their advantage was they got Duke to take a lot of quicker shots.
Yeah.
And when you take a quicker shot, it comes off the rim a little harder. And for a team that has a disadvantage on the glass against Duke, they were able to grab some of those longer rebounds and turn up court. In fact, I thought it got Knuppel into a little bit of a rut. He was hitting early. Then he went 21 minutes in the middle of the game without scoring from the field. And that started around the time that Carolina started pressuring and speeding up things a little bit more. So it worked. And I thought that was one thing Hubert did really well. It worked. But Carolina did not. Somebody just doesn't have enough to sustain that for 40 minutes against Duke. You can get a 35-13 run, which, by the way, no one has done against this Duke team all year. It says, I think that Carolina validated the 6-game win streak during that run simply because they played crap competition, but they were pounding those teams, and they showed in the Duke game that they weren't the team that was in Durham because Duke was up 36-21. The team in Durham would have wilted at that point, but this team had built up a lot of reserve, a lot of confidence that showed up at that time, and they had actually played well enough that they brought some of that to the game. They just didn't have 40 minutes of it, David, because I don't think that they have 40 minutes in which they could beat Duke under any circumstance. I think there are two teams in this league they cannot beat, no matter how many times they play them. That's Duke and Clemson. And a big part of it is the size and the other two teams' ability to guard and force Carolina's guards to really, really struggle and limit what the bigs get. And we saw Duke do that because they closed 33-13. And Carolina's shot opportunities were pretty ugly for the last 15 minutes of the game. RJ's last points were with 17:43 to left. He was 0 for 5 the rest of the game. And it seemed like he shot more, but he just didn't get looks. Duke just did not let him become RJ the rest of the way.
Yeah, and, looking at the stats here, it's really weird. North Carolina only had 8 assists, but they had a positive assist to turnover ratio. They only turned it over 6 times. Duke turned it over 14 times. So North Carolina had 16 points off turnovers. So that helped them. And here's a wild stat.
And I think Carolina had 9 steals too.
Yeah. And here's a huge stat, speaking of 9. North Carolina had 9 more shots than Duke took. Now you say, okay, Duke got them on the foul line. Well, no, they didn't. Duke was 11 of 13 from the line. North Carolina was 10 of 11. But North Carolina got 64 shots. Duke only got 55. And a big part of that was it came from the turnovers. They had 8 more turnovers. Duke did. So North Carolina took 9 more shots. But the weird thing is, you get beat by 13 and you still take 9 more shots. 56% shooting to 39% shooting. And I think that all goes back to the size, like you said. You get them in a half-court game. Duke's bigger. North Carolina doesn't have the rim protection at the rim. Duke gets there and scores, whereas North Carolina tries to get to the rim, and they don't. And second half shooting was way down too, but they have trouble scoring as much simply because Duke's hanging out around the rim, and they got all that size, and they do so much shot adjusting. So, I think that was an indictment really of how it's been a big discussion all year, how North Carolina just simply came up snake eyes when it came to getting players in the portal, big men. And, it's been a case. That's been the case this year. It's hurt them in games. It hurt them against Duke. And that's something that they're really going to have to address in the portal, because I think you saw last night, Ben Lubin had 11 points. He does some good things, but he's 6'7"ish. He's really a 4. He's not a rim protector. They just don't have that guy. Jalen Washington didn't have – stat line wasn't strong at all. They just don't have that dude inside, and they're going to have it. And so, obviously they're going to have to go in the portal and find them a 5.
I think they will definitely do that. They will find maybe a lot of stuff in the portal, because I think they may have quite a few spots to fill. We'll talk about that perhaps in a week or so if the season is over in a week. David, a couple things I want to hit on about this game. Cooper Flagg, I thought there were 2 gifts Carolina got in this game that it needed to have. Cooper Flagg got an early foul trouble, went out. Although Duke extended the lead when he was out for a while, and I thought Shire was going to keep him out because they had enough of a lead. But John sensed, obviously, that Carolina was starting to chip away, and Duke could only go so long without Cooper. And they needed him back on the floor, so he puts him back out there with 5.5 minutes left. 2 minutes later, he picks up his third foul, has to go to the bench again, and Carolina closed 10-2. As it turned out, Carolina outscored Duke 26-22 in the first half when Flagg was on the bench with those fouls. Hubert Davis was asked after the game about how much they tried to attack Cooper Flagg to draw a 4th foul in the second half, and he said not at all. Said that wasn't their mission at all. Flagg never came out of the game in the second half. He never subbed out once, played all 20 minutes. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm looking at Cooper Flagg's second half numbers. He had 10, 7, and 5 points, rebounds, and assists.
Pretty fair number.
Yeah. That comes out to be 20, 14, and 10. That's a triple double.
That's Cooper Flagg.
Yeah, but his plus minus was 15. The highest on the team for Duke was Malik Brown at 20. They had 2 guys at 13. His plus minus was 15. I would have been going at him early on and trying to so you might look at it different ways, but my critique would be this. Obviously, North Carolina, like you said, wasn't running their usual offense. It was ball screen, try to spread them out and attack. That's North Carolina's offense anyway. And they were going after the 5. So why not go after Cooper Flagg's men, or Cooper Flagg of R.J. Davis, get to switch and go, because that's what you're doing offensively anyway. So you can't say, hey, it's out of what we were doing offensively because we were running this system or that system. We had all this movement. We were running flex or we were running whatever. No, they were spreading it out, attack, trying to spread the floor and go, which I thought was a pretty good strategy, but it didn't work in the second half. But, why not try to go after the guy with 4 fouls? Because, obviously that makes it a different – I think in a true road game like Duke faced, just having Flagg on the bench, if you can unnerve them at all. So you look over there and your studs over there with 4, and the crowd would get really pumped up about that if it happened. But if you can just get Duke's anxiety level up a little bit, if nothing else. But like I said, if you were playing them at Duke or playing them on a neutral floor, that's one thing. But, that place was rock. You were in it. That place was rocking last night. And so they obviously would have had more to cheer about. It just gets it going. So, but I understand, too, if I'm Hubert, my rebuttal would be, well, look, we went from down 1, not attacking him early in the half, and we went up 5. So
Yeah.
I can see what we were doing was working. I could see that from him too. So he probably had an escape hatch right there.
I also think, and I'm not defending Hubert, I just have the vast experience of being in just about every one of his media availabilities since he got hired. Spent a lot of time around him. I also think that at times Hubert just doesn't tell us what happened.
Yeah.
Not that he's lying. I think he just doesn't want to get into it.
Yeah.
And it's because if he were to say yes, that opens up a new line of questioning. I think that forces him to maybe feel like he has to explain more, or he doesn't want to give it away because maybe they got to play him again, whatever the case may be. Because I know that we've asked about plays drawn up at the end of a half or something like that. They won't talk about it. The players won't talk about it. They've been instructed not to because they may use it again, even though everybody's well scouted and they know what you do. But that's a tough one there because the response by a lot of people is, how on earth can you not go after the best player in the country and get him on the bench? Because you did pretty well to close out the half. You forced Shire to put him back in to get a third. And then he got the third, and you closed 10-2. Why not use that strategy and go after him? Well, of course. And why not say, of course, who wouldn't try to get the best player in the country on the bench with a fourth foul? But he didn't say that. So I'm kind of torn, thinking maybe it's Hubert just being guarded Hubert, or did they really not try to get the fourth? Because I can recall one incident, I believe it was Seth Trimble was up in the air, and Cooper kind of banged him near the rim, and they could have called a fourth foul. And they also were fine. To me, it was okay not calling. It was one of those iffy things. I don't remember any other sequence in the second half where, Cooper almost got his fourth foul. And I just wonder where you stand on that based on what you saw. I'm not trying to get all on Hubert here. Yeah. I'm just trying to understand, because I think a lot of fans don't quite understand it. Hubert just isn't going to give you much. And if sometimes it makes it seem like he doesn't know what happened or doesn't understand something, he doesn't really care. He just doesn't want to give a whole lot. And I think this is one of those times.
I'll give you my examples here or from what I've been privy to this year. And in covering a lot of different SEC games, I've noticed different things about different coaches. For example, a Mark Pope, if they win, is going to give you a lot more than a Mark Pope when he loses, because he's just not a happy camper. He doesn't feel like talking much.
A lot of coaches are like that.
Yeah. Nate Oates, if you would have asked him about that, and that was Nate Oates' decision to make, you'd still be sitting there in a press conference trying to get away from him, because he would have talked about, and he's an open book about that stuff. And I remember Mark Sears in a game that I went to down there. Mark Sears had 2 early fouls, and they asked, there was a lady in the press conference asking him about taking Mark Sears, and he said, why did you not play him much in the first half? And he said, well, he had foul problems. So he had 2 fouls. He said, no. He said, I don't think he did. And he was like, yeah, he did too. He had 2. So they're kind of, and they said, she gets it. And she said, I'm sorry, Mark Sears did have 2 fouls. So he could have really just kind of blew her off. But he went, well, now that we're on the subject, let's talk about it. And that's where it went for the next 5 minutes. And totally an open book on that stuff. So coaches are different.
I like covering Nate Oates.
No, you love covering Nate Oates. But he's an open book on us. But coaches are different. Yeah. And winning and losing is different. I would like to know, my thing would be, I'm not sure how much, and you may have a better bite on this than I do, being right there, how much how much John Shire is on analytics, how much you trust it, because they're not, analytics say shoot the three. Duke doesn't shoot a ton of threes. They play more of an old school game, but he's a new age coach, a younger guy, and those kind of guys really love to go into the analytics. So if you look at the analytical model with a lot of these young guys, it says don't take a player out with 2 fouls. And I've heard different coaches say that really follow analytics. They say the numbers do not back up to putting a player on the bench with 2 first half fouls. It's just play them. But there's a difference in getting 2 first-half fouls and getting 3 first-half fouls.
Yeah.
And then getting that fourth, like he did, then getting that fourth in the second half. If you get that fourth early in the second half, I don't care who you are and how much you trust the numbers, you've got to let him set for at least about the 8-minute mark if you've got your best player over there with 4 fouls. So I think having 4 fouls in the second half is much different than having 2 fouls in the first.
I agree with you on that. And I'm used to Hubert, who generally will sit a guy the whole half once he picks up 2. He's done that quite a bit. Let's shift to the last few weeks. The Tar Heels have changed. Hubert has gone bigger with Jay Witt and Lubin up front. Jay Witt is the starter at the 4. He's also starting Drake Powell at the 3, which is more his natural position, although Hubert laughs when we ask him about the 3 and the 4 thing. There's really no difference. Although I did get him to say after the presser on Thursday, because when it was over with, because I asked him about Drake and the 3 and if he's getting different shots, and he says his answer publicly was, no, it doesn't really. But I said afterward, are we making too much of that? He said, no, I understand where you're going with that. I understand where you're going with, the way things flow as the 3 as opposed to the 4. So I say that Drake Powell's been better since they went big. Jalen Withers has relieved a lot of the stuff up front, and suddenly, because teams have to guard him because he's hit 3s, Vinal Lubin's ability to use his hips and economize his movement has gotten open. He's been able to score more rolls to the basket. He's been able to get more ISOs on the block. And it's opened up more open shooting on the perimeter, and they've been a much better perimeter shooting. I know that the competition sucked during those 6 games, by and large. It was bad. But they were still a different team. Yeah. I do think there was some carryover into Saturday night why we saw they were an improved team. But you have seen the best conference in the country play night in and night out, and you've seen the ACC play. Where would you say this Carolina team is now, and how much can we glean, other than the approach, from those 6 wins going into the Duke game?
Well, I think, let me go into North Carolina compared to now and then, and if I get off down a rabbit trail here and I don't answer your question, tell me exactly what you make sure don't dodge it. But
in general terms, just where do you think this team is, and how much has it changed the last few weeks? Because they were a bad team when they left Clemson.
Part of my criticism on recent podcast was, even when they were winning, the games I used specifically were North Carolina State and Notre Dame, who are bad teams. You had no business, I don't care if it is a road game, coming down to hoping Notre Dame misses a layup at the buzzer and a goaltend, a very close, which was, and it was a right call, but you don't need to be in one possession games of those teams. You ought to be blowing those teams out. And that's what I said a month ago on here. That was part of the problem. Not only are they losing to teams, really good teams, they're barely scraping by against the bad ones. That California and SMU were about the only thing that you had to look at where you're like, wow, this is what they could be. Now, the last 6 games, they did that, and I'm not so sure early in the year that they would have beat them like that. So they obviously look better. But the last podcast that I was on here was 3 weeks ago, and they had those 6 games, and then they were going to have Duke. They did exactly what I thought they would do. I thought they would go 6-0. I didn't know that they could play badly enough to lose to any of those teams. But they
You did say that, actually.
They really stretched it out and played well, played better. They ran. They had more size on the wing. And I just thought they played aggressively on defense. They played harder on offense. They could get big spurts. And that's what you want to look at, what they call the knockout runs, any run that's 10-0. And they talk about if you can have 2 knockout runs a game, 2 10-0 runs per game, you win like 98.5% of the time. And North Carolina we're getting those. You would they'd be playing, they'd go to a commercial, I'd turn it on to another game or something, or be wide and turn it back. and they've stretched the lead from 4 to 16, like bang, and they would have a couple of those. So that's the way we're playing. So you could see last night, you talk about from being 15 down against Duke to being up 5 in the second half. Well, there's 20 they took off of it. And so you can see the runs, the spurts. If North Carolina were to make the tournament and I had to play against them, I had to coach a team against them, I'd be very worried about their ability to pressure, to cause turnovers in the press, to get out on the long rebounds, on the turnovers, push the ball and run. I would be concerned about that. So that's something that they've done much better. They were averaging 90, against bad teams, but they were averaging 90 points a game in the last 6, over 90 a game going into the Duke game. Now, we saw what happened, when Duke just simply wouldn't let them do that. But, there was no doubt that we saw improvements against that. But the issue was 1-11 in the quad ones. They put themselves in a horrible spot where winning 6 in a row was not enough. They're going to have to win 6 in a row plus beat Duke, and that's almost the mountain that's too high to climb.
All right, well, let's go in that direction because I said last week that I thought they had to beat Duke, which would be a 7th straight win, and they still had work to do in the ACC tournament. I did a piece last week, and I'm going to we're running this podcast Monday, and I'm going to put the piece up maybe Monday night. I'll redo it. But I looked at the last 3 tournaments in which the net was used. The net started in 2019, but they didn't really know what it was that year. Then there was COVID. And then the third year using the net, there was an imbalance in schedule because a lot of teams didn't play the same number of games because of cancellations because of COVID. So the last 3 years, it's been used pretty much the same way. And I went and looked at power conference teams that had overall records that were worthy and net rankings that were worthy of getting in the tournament, perhaps, at least being consideration, and also had 3 or more quad wins. And there were a lot of them that didn't get in the tournament. A lot of them. Now, Oklahoma last year was 4-10 in quad 1 games, and they had an RPI or a net, God, RPI, I'm dating myself, in the 40s and didn't get in. So to me, the number of wins that a lot of Carolina fans are fixated on, well, we got 20 wins and we just beat Pitt and beat Wake by 10 or more. That'll be enough. 22 wins. And no, I don't believe that that's at all an issue right now. I think they're going to be solely judged on this quad 1 thing. And that's why I believe that they have to win the ACC tournament to get in, because if they're going to have to go through Duke on Friday night again. I just don't think they can beat them under any scenario. If Duke somehow gets upset or RJ scores 50 and they somehow get by them, they're still going to have to beat somebody, I think, Saturday night, because that at the minimum would put them at 2-11 before losing Saturday night. 2-12 in quad 1 in a crappy league, I don't think gets you in, David. What do you think this team has to do?
No, I heard someone last week, it was a national media guy, and I'm trying to remember who it was, but anyway, he said North Carolina's resume is like a mid-major resume. And he said, you get a team of over 20 wins and 1 quad 1 win. So when you think about that, who wins 20 games, 22, 23 games and has 1 quad 1 win? Well, you're thinking about Appalachian State, and I'm not trying to.
Look at Indiana State last year. They had 27 wins, and they had 1 quad 1 win or no quad 1 wins. They didn't get in, and they had a player that people wanted to see, too.
Well, and so now this goes back to something that I said yesterday, a tweet that I had Saturday that got generated quite a bit of conversation. And my statement was, and part of this is North Carolina's fault, and part of it's not. And I said, look, admittedly, North Carolina's not up to the standard, or to the Carolina standard that has been set there. And I don't think that's a secret. Honestly, and you know this, I did not buy in this year after early on when they won games and people trying to say they turned the corner and they're legit and all that. I didn't buy in because they had the opportunity to do it against teams to prove it, and they couldn't do it. So I think when you go 1-11, 1-12, excuse me, against quad ones, you made a statement about who you are. Yeah. So they had ample opportunity. But you look, and a lot of those really good teams, they should have beat Florida. I mean, they should have beaten Florida.
Should have beaten Michigan State.
Michigan State was overtime game, if I'm not mistaken. They've had a ton of these games. Louisville was right there. They go to Louisville, it's a tie ball game at the last media timeout. So,
and Louisville closes on a 14-2 run.
Yeah.
Florida closed 14-0 and had 8 second chance points in the last 3 minutes.
Yeah. And
that's the way they were closing those games. The same thing at Kansas. And that was the issue they were trying to hurdle back then. And that was our damn storyline for 2 months.
Yeah. So they're trying to get through that. And they played some of those teams closely. But you don't get rewarded for that. So they lose those games. And my statement was, you lose those games, and now, but not only do you have a problem, a team problem, a record problem, you've got a league problem. You can go through and go 6-0 and just wipe teams out one after another, and it doesn't move the needle. And I know this, living outside of the state of North Carolina, nobody outside the state was really took notice. I mean, it's like people across the country, North Carolina, they gave up on North Carolina a couple months ago. So all this stuff that was going on, Carolina fans could really maybe get behind it, but nationally, nobody was paying attention. And so that's an issue, but that tells you how bad the league is. North Carolina needed what they needed to do, but they couldn't move the needle. They couldn't get any traction. None of that could happen because of the quality of the competition. So that's not a good thing. If you're North Carolina, you had to play those teams, because if you didn't, you wouldn't have any quad one games at all. And then you're taking that gamble. So they had to go tough and go strong in the league. Now, I might next year, instead of playing Florida, I might play Mississippi State. Or instead of playing Michigan State, I might play, Nebraska or somebody like that. But it really, they've got to, and hopefully the league can get better. I'm hoping that there's some hires we talked about before we came on the show, whether it's Will Wade, the American Gangster, or Mark Byington, or hopefully
John. Those would be great hires in state Virginia. Those would be great hires.
It's easy to sit here as a Carolina fan and say, look, we don't want those teams to be good. We want them to be – no, trust me.
Oh, you want them to – I keep telling people you want them to be good.
You want to get this league built back up. You want this league to be good, because North Carolina doesn't need to keep having these seasons where they get behind the 8 ball and they've got nothing on the schedule. It doesn't matter how many games they win, they've got nothing on the schedule to help.
Here's the thing, and the committee is going to, if they do spend much time on North Carolina, I'm not convinced they're going to spend much time. It depends on what happens this week, but they're going to look at those games that you mentioned and say, kudos for them for playing those games. And they were in some of them, but they didn't win them. But the problem is they've got some really ugly quad one losses too.
Yeah.
Losing at Pittsburgh is a terrible, they're a perfect example of why the net is absurd. But that's what we live by. That's a quad one loss, but Pittsburgh's playing Tuesday in the ACC tournament.
There's not a more heated rival, Andrew. There's not a more heated rival, and you've said this. There's nobody out there that hates North Carolina more than Jeff Capel.
Well, I think Jason does now too.
And so North Carolina and Pitt, when they play, it's bitter. So
it is.
It's bitter, and it's because they don't like. It's not because North Carolina, Pitt's got something North Carolina wants. Pitt hates North Carolina so badly, so you have to reciprocate that when you play, and that's big. But North Carolina didn't need Pitt to go to a free fall after they split. I'm sitting here saying, I may not like you, but I hope you win every game the rest of the year.
Yeah.
They need you to be good. They don't need, interestingly enough, I was on a radio, another radio show today, and we were talking about North Carolina going in, and said this. Interestingly enough, Wake Forest is the 4 seed, North Carolina is the 5, and Wake Forest is in worse shape than North Carolina. They're so far out, nobody. They got zero chance.
Wake Forest has a double bye and is lower in the net than Pitt, and they play Tuesday. And Pitt has been atrocious for two. Pitt's won like 4 or 5 games since the calendar turned. One of them was over North Carolina, and they lost by a point at North Carolina, had the ball in the final seconds. And Wake Forest beat Carolina there by a point, but it was an 11-point game with a minute left. At 1 point, it was not a buzzer game at all. But my point is, I still think that's a bad loss. Plus, Carolina has a quad 3 home loss to Stanford. And that was a series where they barely beat BC. They're trash.
Yeah.
They barely beat Pitt. They've proven to be no good.
That was a miracle.
Yeah, BC's not even in the ACC tournament.
Yeah.
So think about this. There are 3 teams not in the ACC tournament. Carolina had to get a dunk and block shot by Jalen Washington in the last 20 seconds to beat one of them, and had to get a miracle stolen inbound pass to go to overtime to beat another one at home.
Yeah.
And those teams aren't in the tournament. And they were only up 4 on Miami with about 6 minutes left, but they were kind of going through the motions there. They ended up doing the job. But my point is that if you dissect this team, I don't see how on earth the committee puts them in unless there are no bid stealers out there. And in fact, everybody else on the bubble falls apart. I know they got some help this weekend. Boise helped them out some, but then Carolina didn't back it up by getting a win. If they would have beaten Duke, they'd probably be on top of the bubble right now. I'm not sure they'd still be on the right side of it. The league's going to get 3 bids, David. 3.
Well, Oklahoma.
No one else is getting in.
Oklahoma had a big week. Georgia had a big week. Indiana had a big week.
Yeah. Indiana won today.
And here's the thing. You hope these teams are going to cut each other's throat, but the bottom line is they're all playing each other. There's so many teams on the bubble, and when you're in SEC and you've got 13 teams going to get in, and you're in a Big Ten and you've got a majority of those teams going to get in, so you've got all these teams playing each other. Well, what happens? They all of them eventually end up getting big wins. So Arkansas did it. Arkansas had a big week.
Georgia Vandy yesterday. Georgia Vandy's a perfect example yesterday.
Yeah. So Vandy had done enough damage. Vandy beats Texas A&M, and so they clinched it 2 weeks ago. So Arkansas had to have a win. Arkansas beats them, and then Georgia beats them on the road. So you've got 3 teams there, counting Vandy the week before that, who got wins that you didn't want them to get. And so you've got worst possible scenario for about 3 or 4 straight games there that put teams probably in front of you. So the thing is, when you just don't want to rely, and you hear them say all the time, put yourself in a situation where you don't have to rely on another guy. And unfortunately, they didn't.
Yeah, when you look at the league, and we might as well talk about this some too, because I think that people need to think broader than just the fact that what's on the front of the jersey. And I've had a lot of people disagree with me in the last week or so. Well, they're going to get 20, 21, 22 wins. It says North Carolina jersey, they're going to get in because of that. They won 20 games 2 years ago and didn't get in.
Yeah. And
they really weren't even close. I don't think that that's going to be a factor, especially the head of the selection committee is their AD, Bubba Cunningham. They put a 1-12 quad 1 North Carolina team in the field, and he's the head of the selection committee. All hell's going to break loose. There are going to be a lot of people that are going to be ticked off. So I think because of that, Carolina has to have an even better kind of record than would be on the fence for them. So that's why they're climbing uphill right now. The other thing about the league, David, is I've watched this league for a long time, and I've covered it. This is my 29th year, and I've covered the league. For years, I had jobs where I was covering the ACC, not just North Carolina. And the teams I can list right now this season that would be last place in a typical ACC year over the last 40-plus years, clearly NC State, Miami, Boston College. I think Virginia Tech by far. They're horrible. I think California would be a last place team. I think the current version of Virginia would be a last place team. Georgia Tech would be a last place team. I'm probably missing somebody right now. I think I said Boston College. I think Notre Dame would be a last place team. I mean, you go back and look at last place. Wake Forest went 0-14 in 1987. They had Muggsy Bogues as their point guard. And it's a different animal in that league now, and it's not even close to a shell of what it once was. It can get back in return. I think those two hires you and I talked about, like if Byington goes to Virginia and Will Wade goes to NC, Will Wade will win immediately at NC State. I think that will help the league. Jay Lucas maybe will win, and Luke Lux down at Florida State might be able to win. But the league needs W's. Carolina fans and fans of everybody in the conference, you need to root for the league in November and December big time, because this stupid net system is baked in by Christmas. That's why Pitt's still a quad one game. And that's why, and Stanford's better than Pitt. Stanford's been a better team in the last 2 months, but they're not a quad one game because they're baked in. Pitt is a quad win because they win at Ohio State. They hit a miracle shot and win at Ohio State, and boom, they're baked in. I just think that the committee knows this, and they say they don't look at conferences and stuff like that, but I think that's hogwash, because that's why you got to leave the room. If you're the head of the selection committee and they talk about your league, you got to leave the room. So I just don't see it. I think they have to win the ACC tournament. I could be wrong, but I think they have to win the ACC tournament. What do you think they have to do to get in? Do you think that's it? Or do you think maybe if they could beat Duke, that might be enough because Duke's so good? Because they would have to beat Duke Friday night.
I think if they could beat Duke I think getting to the championship game. I mean, that was what was on the line this week, because if they would have beaten Duke, we'd be talking differently today. So that's what they're going to have to do. I don't think the other two. Now, here's the thing. If you ask me what percentage of a surety are you right now that you don't think North Carolina will get into the tournament, I would say 80. Not 100, but I would say 80. So there's a 20% shot there the other way. Here's the reason I say that. I have a running discussion with a guy I work with who's a big basketball fan, really smart guy, really should be working at NASA, not with me, and really smart guy. And he's like, why do people watch Joe Lunardi all the time? Why do they listen to Joe Lunardi? And I'm like, Joe Lunardi's really, really accurate. He misses very few. He's really accurate. So he had North Carolina as the first team out yesterday. So, he probably won't have anything. We're doing this on Sunday night. He probably won't have anything out till Monday. So the four in front of him, San Diego State, Indiana got a big win over Ohio State, Xavier, Oklahoma. And then first four out were North Carolina. Texas was behind them. Boise State, who you just mentioned, who's dropping like a balloon, and then or a lead balloon. I don't guess balloons drop, a lead balloon. And Nebraska, who lost yesterday to Iowa.
Nebraska ended up not qualifying for the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah. So they're not going to get it. So North Carolina, at worst, is probably second team out.
So is that because the bubble stinks?
I think.
Am I reading it? I mean, I'm open to being wrong reading this. I maybe part of my, I don't want to say bias would be the right word, because I have seen every minute of what has largely been mediocre at best basketball. They had some upticks. I thought SMU game, Cal, like you mentioned, were pretty good games. I thought they did. Second half at Kansas, they were really good. They were second half against Dayton, they were really good. And I think Dayton's a good team, and watch out for them in the A-10 tournament. I think they can win that tournament. But I mostly what I've seen until the last few weeks has not been very impressive. They just have never really struck me as a tournament team until the last couple of weeks. I think what we see on the court, the club we saw last night is an NCAA tournament team.
Yeah.
But it might be a little too late.
Well, that's the thing, is that they're going to go by more than eye test. Now, here's the thing. I can say, okay, I think North Carolina's better than they would beat this team, this team, this team, and this team. But I can tell you from me trying to bet on games in the past, which I do very rarely. There's a reason I do it very rarely, because I never win. So for me to say, yeah, North Carolina would beat this team is probably a kiss of death for North Carolina, because I'm not good at that. But if I look at yesterday, so Saturday, if I look at Lenardi's 8 teams, so you've got last 4 byes and last 4 in. So last 4 byes, Utah State, I don't know anything about them. Georgia, I think North Carolina could beat Georgia. I've seen Georgia play a bunch this year. Ohio State, I mean, they've lost 14 games, I think, now.
Well, they got blown out at home by Northwestern 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, they would have an opportunity to do that. I think Arkansas got themselves – here's the difference. Arkansas and North Carolina is a great comparison. Arkansas was 1-5 in the SEC, 1-5 or 1-6 in the SEC, and had lost like several games in a row. They were dead in the water. There was buyer's remorse at Arkansas. Why in the world did you get Calipari? People were making death threats to the AD. All that stuff was going on. And what happened was Boogie Flan, the point guard, gets hurt, who's a top 10, top 15 player at a high school, and he moved Juwan Wagner to the point. And roles got defined. It shortened the bench up. And all of a sudden, Arkansas is beating everybody. And that is a athletic unit, man. So here's the thing. I could make a great comparison here with Arkansas and North Carolina, how they were buried, had a bad record, and then they really started taking off at the end of the year. But the problem is Arkansas was beating. They were beating Kentucky. They were beating Vanderbilt. They were beating Missouri. They beat Mississippi State.
North Carolina could beat those teams.
Now, look, none of those teams, you're not going to confuse any of those teams with Duke and Auburn, Houston, and all that. But they're
quad-one games.
NCAA tournament teams.
Yes.
So they had the opportunity to win and say, okay, here's your chance. Make the best out of it. And Arkansas didn't play nearly as strong a schedule preseason as what North Carolina did, or North Carolina didn't have that opportunity. And, when you look at these other teams, San Diego State, Indiana, Xavier, Oklahoma, who I don't think is very good at all. I think North Carolina is much better than Oklahoma, but that's eye test. So the thing is, they had the chance to right the wrongs, and North Carolina didn't. North Carolina was kind of like the guy who commits the felonies and he goes to court. He's been charged. He's dead in the water. They got all the state's evidence. They've got DNA. They got fingerprints. They got everything else. So he starts, donating to charity and working in soup kitchens and helping the little old ladies across the street. And they're saying, look, he's seen the error of his ways. He's a changed person, and they're throwing themselves on the mercy of the court when the evidence is against them. And that's kind of what North Carolina did, where Arkansas has an opportunity to work their way out. North Carolina, like I said, they've not had that opportunity because of the league.
So I agree. I think the Carolina team we saw in Blacksburg, if they were in Nashville, they could have beaten Vanderbilt. I think the Carolina team that we saw in Tallahassee, I think if they were in Starkville, they could have beaten Mississippi State. I think they could, if they were in Athens, they could have beaten Georgia. If they were in Columbia, they could have beaten Missouri. And they didn't have those opportunities because the league stinks. I agree with you. I think Carolina right now, the last 7 games, and I include Duke because there are a lot of things they didn't do great, and they were still in that game. It was a 4-point game with 7 minutes left.
I would
They were
compare
in that
North
game.
Carolina. If I had to make comparisons, I would compare them. What I see, if you ask me where they would be in the SEC, they'd be right where Arkansas and Vanderbilt are at, in my opinion. I would put them, and they may be better than Mississippi State now because Mississippi State's really dropped off. So you're looking at that, and it's still not North Carolina standards. We're talking about 13 teams that are going to get in. I would put them somewhere like those teams are right around the 8, 9, 10 level. That's where I would put them.
But they just didn't have the opportunities to win those quad one games.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If
and
North Carolina was in, there's been all this talk about conference movement talk. If North Carolina was in the Big Ten or the SEC, where would they be at right now? And I think that all comes down to recruiting. You'd have more money to recruit. You'd get more money back from the SEC network, from the ACC network. There's been a lot of talk about that. How much money now the SEC programs are getting compared to the ACC programs, what they're getting. Yeah. I think brand recognition's huge, and I think that's what hurts the ACC because you've got so many teams, not teams, you've got so many athletic programs in the ACC that just don't move the needle in anything. You know, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, North Carolina State, I'm sorry, doesn't. Pitt, Boston College.
Yeah.
They just don't move the needle. And you get stuck with all these bad brands, and it just brings the league down, and it makes you look at times like you're even though you've got some very good brands there, but they're not many. It's not quantity. And I think it just hurts the overall product. It really kind of hurts the teams. Now, Duke would argue, if you're Duke, you're like, it's not hurting us a lot. But if you are, I think it's done a number on a lot of these teams.
I agree with you, and I don't think it's as much money at least in basketball because ACC teams get a lot more money than the Big 12, and the Big 12 is better in basketball. Although the new Big 12 has a lot more stuff in the middle and bottom than it used to. That's just not that impressive. This has not been a great year for that league either. I think you and I need to have a lengthy conversation on a show in a month or two when the NCAA tournament's over and we really dive into what you're talking about right here. I think people would be very interested in that. I've been really well connected with a lot of stuff that's been going on for a while. And I will say now, and I've said it before, I know that there are power people in the ACC that would love to be able to snip BC and Wake Forest just like that and move forward and never miss a beat. And imagine that those black holes don't have to be filled up anymore, and it raises the value moving along. There's a reason North Carolina joined FSU and Clemson and not voting to approve SMU and Cal and Stanford, because the more isn't merrier sometimes. I understand why they did it, but there's also that keeping the strong brand strong, and that's something that the league's having to deal with right now. And it's also hurting on the playing field and on the court. I would argue vehemently that ACC football is better and has been better for a few years than ACC basketball. And that's a mouthful because ACC football is not very good compared to the other powers. So the league has an issue. North Carolina fans, you need to stop laughing every time NC State loses a game in November and December. You need to stop laughing when Virginia loses games. You need to root for those teams because it does your team good. That's the way the system is set up. So you have to embrace it and roll with it. Otherwise, and I'd made a joke in the 3 Things video with Jacob after the game Saturday night that North Carolina fans probably understand the whole quad 1, quad 2 thing as much or better than any other fan base because they're on it other than last year, they're on it every year. Every stinking year they're on it.
I would say this too. If you're, and I know I've seen a lot of things, discussions among fans who realize this, is that right now the SEC, where it's an arms race obviously between the SEC and the Big Ten now, but SEC is in a bigger position of power on basketball than it's ever been. Yeah. And so you're talking about a league that's going to get 13 in probably, we think. So if you look at North Carolina, look at who they've been losing players to in recruiting out of high school and the portal. It's SEC teams, guys that they used to get. So you lose a Jaron Stevenson and a Cliff Omarui to Alabama. Yes. You lose a Jasper Johnson, although that's probably not a good example because he's from Kentucky, but you still lost him in Kentucky. Jonas Adu, and I understand the circumstances that were behind that, but you lose him to Tennessee and you lose Walker Kessler to Auburn, who was in your program, all within about 24 hours of each other. Yeah. So, they've had a lot of players that they've gone after. The player, the number one player they had out of South Carolina, that ended up decommitting, going to South Carolina.
Oh yeah,
I'm talking about. Anyway,
I know I'm drawing.
I'll let her run a lot, but anyway, it'll hit me here. It'll hit me here as soon as we get out. But anyway,
it was Gigi and his very present on social media, mama.
So Gigi anyway, Gigi. So anyway. He decommits, go to South Carolina. Now, there's been circumstances behind a lot of these where it's just not a black and white, dry and cut case. But, it seems like when they lose a player that they really want, they really need, the culprit's always SEC team. So there you go. So you can look at that and say, the power that they're having, the success that they're having, one of the schools that's really hurting is North Carolina.
Yeah. Also, look at the coaches in that league and look at what they're being paid. It's a different animal. The ACC. We'll have a very lengthy discussion on this. I don't want to go too far down that right now. Let me throw this one at you. I know you're probably not big on making predictions, and you don't have to if you don't want to. But what does Carolina do in the ACC tournament? And next Sunday, will they be in the field?
I think they'll win.
They have to play they would play the Notre Dame winner Tuesday.
Yeah.
And if they win that, they would play Wake on Thursday. If they win that, likely Duke on Friday.
Pitt, Notre Dame, I don't have enough confidence in either one of those teams. I think, Pitt should win. There was one time this season, if you said you think Notre Dame was going to beat Pitt, you'd be committed somewhere. But
I thought it was going to make the tournament and be a decent seed for a long time.
So it makes you wonder, a team like that has had it in front of them and lose it, do you just mail it in compared to Notre Dame, who's, been up against the wall all year long and has continued to fight? So, that could go either way. But Man, I'm going to tell you what, if North Carolina...
They shouldn't have trouble with either one of them. They shouldn't have trouble with either one of them.
If they lose to either one of those, the bottom would really fall out. But once again, do you go to that old North Carolina Pitt thing where Capel says they win and they say, look here, man, we're not going to go out there and just go through the motions against North Carolina because we don't like them. So there you get to that rivalry part. Wake Forest will be I think they're better than Wake Forest. I think maybe they want revenge a little bit. I think they'll win 2 games. They'll get to the ACC semis, and I think Duke gets them probably pretty handily. I mean, if you look, like I said, the game at North Carolina was the perfect storm. Yeah. And you got Flagg on the bench. You got R.J. Davis in the zone. You got the crowd going crazy.
You got Nipple going 21 minutes without scoring.
You still don't cover. So now you're in there's no home court advantage. Although I know North Carolina always shows up well, but Duke's they're going to have a mob in there for that.
They will.
And because they think it's going to be a coronation ceremony. So they'll be there. And I wonder if there are North Carolina fans out there just say, it's not worth it this year. The spin.
I've already heard from people saying that they would rather lose to Wake than have to deal with getting blown out by Duke.
Yeah. So I just don't think it sets up well. So I think they win 2, lose 1, get beaten in the semis. And I think that they
22 and 13
come up very, very, very short when it comes to Selection Sunday, where they're like the first or second team out. You just got to hope that there are no bid stealers in the league. Here's what you got to hope for. You've got to hope that the teams that are just in front of them, Oklahoma, Indiana, teams like that, lose early against very low-seeded teams. And I'm not talking about Indiana losing in the first. I don't even know who these teams play. So you've got to hope that not against Michigan State or Arkansas loses to Alabama or somebody like that. You've got to hope that Arkansas loses to LSU, and that Indiana loses to Penn State or something like that, where they have the bad loss. And even though North Carolina doesn't gain anything, they can jump straight ahead. There's still reasons to scoreboard watch, but you just feel – I don't know what's out there, but let's say everything's equal. I think they got to beat Duke to get in.
I think you got to pay attention to Oregon State Gonzaga tomorrow night. I think Oregon State can steal a bid in the West Coast Conference. And they would then have to play, I think, St. Mary's if they get by Santa Clara, which Santa Clara is not a bad team. Also, the Atlantic 10, I really have a feeling Dayton's going to win that tournament. And they've got quite a few clubs. They've got Loyola can win that thing. George Mason, I think VCU is probably going to get in. George Mason may have to win some games there. They might be in the discussion, but I doubt it. They could win that tournament.
Andrew,
they've been first place for a long time this year. So what?
I'll tell you an interesting one. So Arkansas plays South Carolina. And Arkansas, you'll remember when they played Saturday week ago, they had 15 at the half, if you'll remember.
I remember that.
It was awful.
People were monitoring that in Preston, Carolina.
I think Arkansas will be in good shape. They'll get South Carolina, and then they get Ole Miss in round 2, and I think one will be enough. Here's the one. So if you're looking for some positive news.
Also, by the way, Mountain West is a chance for a bid stealer. I could see a Nevada winning that thing. I could see Boise rebounding and winning, maybe San Diego State. I think that's one that league, that happens a lot in that league. Those are conferences to watch out for.
Georgia plays Oklahoma in the Wednesday. The SEC opens up on Wednesday, so there's 4 games. Georgia plays Oklahoma in the late night game. You couldn't ask for a better setup there if you're North Carolina. So somebody that's just ahead of them is going to get, let's see. So you've got Oklahoma is one ahead. Georgia's in that next group. If Georgia beats Oklahoma in that first round, Oklahoma is one team ahead of them, according to Lenardi. That's of Saturday. Now, there may be a bigger stretch now. It won't come out to Monday. So if Oklahoma could get knocked out in that first round on Wednesday night, and they're the low seed there, if they could get knocked out by Georgia, that could be big. That could really help.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. Carolina fans are going to be watching other conference tournaments. I would pay attention to Oregon State Gonzaga for sure. I think the A-10 tournament's going to be good. There's about 5 or 6 teams in there that I enjoy watching. And the Mountain West is always intriguing, to be honest with you. And it's not as good as it was a year ago, but there's some solid teams in there. I just have a feeling that league's going to end up with 4 when it should maybe be a 3 bid league. And Carolina fans just need everything to go chalk in these other leagues.
So Ohio State obviously lost to Indiana Saturday, so they could be back in that first 4 out.
They got 6 quad 1 wins. They have 6 quad 1 wins.
They play Iowa in the first, and that's just to play in to get to the quarters.
Yeah, that would be a bad loss, losing Iowa.
Yeah, and then Indiana plays Oregon in the 8-9.
They just lost Oregon the other day.
Yeah. So they play in 8-9. So you still got a chance, a very good chance that, Ohio State they should, but you never know about Iowa. There's all this talk about brand friend retiring at the end of the year. There's all that. So you can't ever count Iowa out.
I've heard some chatter that Steve Forbes would be on Iowa's list.
I've heard that too. So, you've got Ohio State in a tough game off the bat. You've got Indiana in a tough game. And you've got two teams. If I'm North Carolina and say, okay, who would you like to play in the SEC tournament? I said, man, I'd like Oklahoma and Georgia to play in the first, like on a Wednesday night, just to get to the quarters, and somebody gets knocked out and you win two. I tell you what, I'm going to go from 80%, not after I look at this, I'm going to go from 80% not thinking they make it to 70. I'm going to go to 70.
Your late night point, for people who may not understand, if you've ever been to these conference tournaments, that 9:30 game, often someone's flat.
Yeah.
Often someone is just dead flat, and those games are blowouts. And the building's empty by the 10-minute mark of the second half. So that's where you're going with that. I've covered a lot of those, seen a lot of them. I can see Oklahoma, especially with the way they play, and I don't know how much confidence there is in Porter Moser right now. I can see Oklahoma being flat and Georgia being amped up and taking care of business in that one.
Yeah.
Can you see that happening?
Yeah, I could. And anything could happen. Georgia's the high seed there. And Georgia played very well. And Oklahoma had a good week too. But Georgia's
a better team, I think.
Georgia's a better team, yeah. And it's funny what you said about the tournaments. I don't know how it sets up at Greensboro, but going to the SEC tournament in Nashville, Bridgestone's right beside 2nd Avenue. So you walk out, it's like walking out of the arena onto Bourbon Street, exactly what it's like. So all you've got at 11 o'clock at night in there are Kentucky fans taking their vacation and a bunch of drunks. That's all you got. So
that's a hell of a clientele there.
Yeah,
FedEx Forum's like that a lot in Memphis too. It's right next to Beale Street.
Yeah, you go out, but you have to walk the Beale. You can see.
Yeah, you have to go like a block and a half
across to get the Beale. If you can get away from the muggers, get the Beale, you're good. But
if you walk on the side of the street FedEx Forum's on to get the Beale, you might be okay. It's a little more dangerous if you cross the street.
I got a real good buddy of mine who he does basketball recruiting too. I'm not going to mention his name. Probably wouldn't care, but I'm not going to. But anyway, he's a lot younger than we are. He's still in his 20s, and he went to Memphis to cover a tournament and likes to go out to the bars and clubs after it's over. And he said everybody that come in had on ski masks. They let them wear them in Memphis. He said, I was out. I went back to the hotel. So, I'm not – don't ask me to do any American Athletic Conference tournament games. And
I have done
Grizzlies games before, and I have to tell you this one. The first Grizzlies game I ever went to, there's a church that there's a pond right next to the FedEx Forum, and there's a church on the other side. So the church was well lit. You drive in, you park. They charged $10 to park at that time. You could walk to the arena in 3 minutes. They guarded your cars. Nothing was going to happen. Great. So anyway, I paid a guy. My daughter's with me. She's young. She wanted to see Shaq and Dwayne Wade for the Heat. So that tells you how long it's been. So they're playing so we go, my wife, my daughter. So we go. And I asked the guy, we haven't had anything to eat. We're rushing over there trying to beat traffic, and we get there early. So I asked the guy, I said, is there anything, where can we eat at? We've not eaten. He said, well, they got a good barbecue place inside. And I'm like, well, I don't really want to eat at the concession stand. It turned out it was good. So, but anyway, I said, I don't want to do that. And I said, what if I walked down here to the end of this street and hung a left? And he said, if you walk down at that street and you hang a left, nobody will ever see you again. So I won't do that. So, and he was a member of the community there, so he knew that area well. So I've covered out there and ate barbecue inside the FedEx Forum.
I think I've been to Memphis 5 times. I've covered Carolina won the regional there in 2009 and 2017, and I was there this past October. Yeah, if you're on Beale Street within a certain parameter, you're going to be okay because it's pretty well lit up. But it's when you veer off Beale Street, that's.
Oh yeah, you don't want to do that. But I would advise, Nashville has hosted tournaments. Have hosted the NCAA tournament in the past, and they're getting ready to build a dome there, so they may get final.
Oh, they are.
Here, yeah. They're in the process.
Oh, cool.
Right next to the stadium. So if North Carolina ever played Vanderbilt there or played in a tournament or something at Nashville and you've not been, I would advise everybody to go because it's right there in the middle of everything. You can walk from your hotel to the arena. You've got all the restaurants, all the bar, everything's there on 2nd Avenue. So it's a perfect setup. You couldn't ask for a better setup.
Yeah, Nashville's got a lot going for it. Well, now that we've done the Chamber of Commerce work for the city of Nashville, we can probably conclude this podcast.
And after we wreck Memphis tourism.
Yeah, no kidding. Memphis will. Well, yeah, I did. Well, anyway, I'll do it. We'll do Memphis some other time. I'll end up going 8 more minutes. I was going to tell the whole story about Grayson.
You can do a travel blog. You probably fly 5 million miles a year, so you'd be great.
I've been to 46 states. So I've not been to Wyoming, Montana, Hawaii, and Alaska. I've actually never covered the tournament in Hawaii, believe it or not.
And I could do every greasy spoon, meat and three, or barbecue pit in the rural South.
Brett Friedlander, 2017, driving from Memphis, halfway coming back to Raleigh. We went through Alabama. We stopped at a Waffle House in Alabama, middle of nowhere, and our server told us that she was third cousin or third tier generation from Elvis. And she went on to tell us every Elvis story she could think of each time she came back with coffee or whatever it was. This is like 1:30 in the morning. This was the night that Luke May hit the shot to beat Kentucky.
Were they good stories?
Oh, they were great stories. We didn't believe them at all, but they were still great stories.
Wow.
They were fantastic. We gave her a big old tip because she entertained us, and I can't remember her name. I'm sure Brett Friedlander will remember, but that was a lot of fun.
And I'll take a story I'll take a time here once and be able to share a story about the guy who told me about shooting on the rifle range next to Lee Harvey Oswald in Dallas in 1963. True story. I'm not making that up.
I want that. We should do a non-basketball podcast just telling stories.
I could
name your stories in basketball and travels, but then people like that.
The guy that told me that story, he's dead now, so they can't dig him up and shoot him before he testifies. So, no, they might shoot me before I testify.
I'd shoot you, yeah. All right, real quick. If there is a surprise team to win the ACC tournament, like what happened last year, and you can't say, well, I don't see Duke or Clemson losing because I don't see both of them losing. But if there is a team that plays 4 days or more to win it, who is it?
I mean, it'd have to be Louisville. If you told me I couldn't pick Clemson.
But Louisville's they're 18-2. A team that has to play 4 days. Louisville gets a double bye.
Hold on.
So the double byes are Wake, Louisville, Clemson, Duke. Some other than those four, who do you think is most capable of making a miracle run and winning the thing?
Okay, hold on here. I'm looking at the bracket.
I can tell you mine.
So it would have to be somebody who's going to come out. Cal, Virginia Tech, Florida State, Stanford, and Syracuse all should be arrested for impersonating basketball teams. So I would say SMU at the 6 would beat Clemson at the 3, and then you got to stay away from Duke. And that's the only
thing
outside of Clemson and Louisville can line up.
But the thing about it is, assuming those two would lose, who's the most likely team that could come out of that that plays Tuesday or Wednesday that could win 3, the most likely one? You think SMU? That means Duke you'd have to get to Duke at some point.
Yeah, you would in a chance. Look, I don't think, to me,
It's not going to happen.
No, there's not going to be a North Carolina State this year.
Who would be North Carolina State? Let's just have fun with it. I think it would be North Carolina.
The best team's North Carolina.
I think it would be North Carolina because
Carolina's the best. Would be the best team to me, not in the top. I think they're the best team, not in the top 3. But man, the team would have to, I think, to take the run. But if you look, I'm basically putting everything about being able to beat Duke.
Yeah.
So really, North Carolina would probably have the easier road if they did beat Duke, because SMU would have to beat Clemson, Louisville, and Duke back to back to back.
Yeah.
So whereas if North Carolina, let's say North Carolina beats Pitt, and then they beat Wake Forest, and then they beat Duke, and then they get Clemson on their side. I mean, those are all tough games. I think, I'll put it this way, I think North Carolina is the best team in it, lower than a 3.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
I would have to say, I just think SMU stays away from Duke early. You know, they could get Clemson and Louisville. I don't think either one of them is probable, but I just think getting to the finals, SMU would, to me, simply because they get to stay away from Duke to the championship game.
I'm going to pick Duke to win the tournament, but it's going to be Duke.
Oh, there's a stretch.
Yeah, well, I mean, hell, they're great. I think Clemson's damn good. I think Clemson's built to get to a Final Four.
Can you get me Duke winning ACC tournament at 100-1?
I think the winner is going to be either Duke or Clemson. I don't think anybody else can, including Louisville. I think Louisville's good. It's a great story, but I don't think Louisville is at Duke's level. And I don't, quite frankly, think they're a neutral court the way Clemson's been playing. I don't think they're Clemson either. And Louisville's been playing great too. They might be able to shoot a ton of threes and beat them. They'd have to, but nobody outside that group anyway is going to win this thing. So there won't be an NC State, but figured I would throw it out there anyway.
Well, we didn't think there'd be an NC State last year, but I don't think Duke last year and Duke this year's comparable. I think Clemson and Duke right now are better than Carolina was a year ago as the 1 seed in the tournament. Carolina was a more beatable 1 seed than what Clemson or Duke are right now, especially Duke. But Clemson, I think Clemson is really, really good, David. Really good. And they're built for this time of year. Zachary is better than Gerard for this team. And the big guy, the Russian, is Lufkin, is really given them a dimension that they lacked last year that now they have. Ian Shefflin doesn't have to grab 20 rebounds a game now. Yeah.
So, all right, man. I enjoyed it. We'll get that Lee Harvey Oswald story at some point.
No,
I got to have that.
It's a true story.
I got to have that story. All right. For David, I'm AJ. We appreciate y'all stopping by and spending an hour and 22 minutes with us. Thanks.